Good evening. Welcome to the overnight edition of From Day One. As you always say, tell your friends, tell your enemies, hell, tell anyone you find on the street that we're here. Art Bell is ready tonight with Jason Martell. Lost Cycle of Time and Ancient UFO Technology. So, without further ado, let's get to Dark Matter Radio from the Sirius XM network era. October 28th, 2013.
From the high desert and the great American Southwest, exclusively on Sirius XM Radio, this is Dark Matter with your host, Art Bell. Extra. Now, here's Art.
Terrestrial radio. I'm in a hurry, I guess. Sorry, Ross. Welcome, everybody. Welcome, Dark Riders. I love that tune, Dark Riders. I'm sure it'll get stolen. Everything else right here is being stolen from me. But it's all right, because remember, it originated here with me. All right, I've got a whole bunch of stuff I want to say before we get to our guest, Jason Martell, who's going to be talking about what came before us. That's right, what came before us. I want to say hi to my two little roses over there at the house. Hi, Asia. Our little 6-year-old first grader is under the weather. She's got a temperature varying between 100 and 102. And so, not feeling well, and so every night she wishes me extra good luck as I leave, so extra get better, honey. And of course, Aaron, who is taking care of her over there. And me, who's hiding from the virus here. Been lucky. Really, I have been lucky lately. I didn't get the last cold. Now we're going to see if I get this one. Doing international living is interesting. I, of course, was over in the Philippines, where we had the benefit of Asia going to preschool there, and every available Southeast Asian virus we've had them. Then preschool here, and all the North American viruses. They've been interesting. And now first grade, and the first grade viruses. It's lucky I'm here at all tonight, actually. We had, before I get into that, I've done some audio adjustments. So I would like your objective opinion, please, as you listen on XM, as you listen on Sirius, and as you listen on the web, whether the audio sounds okay to you. I found it very, very disconcerting that some people were telling me that Skype sounded better than I did. Very disconcerting. I mean, Skype is good, but, not supposed to be studio mic good. Anyway, lucky I'm here. We had forecasts originally for, get this, folks, 75-mile-an-hour winds. Then they cut it down to 70, down to 65, and then 55. And today we had 50-mile-an-hour winds. It was ripping out there. So I was thinking, well, will we have internet? Will we have power? Will I have a house? But it's turned out okay, so we're here. And the wind has indeed this evening let up, thank goodness. The desert can rage, believe me. All right, so the wind didn't get me. What almost did, though, Saturday was I was standing in the living room, and I felt something on the back of my neck moving, and I reached back and slapped it hard, and I came away with a handful of goo, and this thing fell on the floor that looked like, to me, the Godzilla of spiders. It wasn't. Probably a baby tarantula was my best guess because it was hairy. Anyway, I slapped it, killed it, but not before it nailed me in three places. One main one and two little ones. It nailed me, but good. And, I thought, this is it. When you get it in the back of the neck like this, now the spider either crawled on me at some point and got to my neck, or fell on me, I thought, from the ceiling. Either way, it doesn't matter. I thought I was toast. and I did a little drama and staggered around the house for a while. I really actually did think I was toast. I thought, well, if it's poison, it's here in my neck, it's right next to the brain, and it's going to be fast. So I didn't go to the hospital. The hospital came to me. The fire department came, the medics. They checked me out, wrote a long report, and they need all these numbers. Social security numbers and on and on and on. Anyway, bottom line is I'm okay. The spider, they had me save the spider in a little jar with some bread to keep it in good shape so that if I did suddenly fall over, I'd be able to take my aggressor with me to the hospital and they could look at him and tell me what he is. Pretty good. There's a picture on the website, by the way, of the spider, or actually only what's left of the spider. The majority of him was goo. So if big ick factor, right? Goo all over my hand, goo over the back of my neck, the side of the back of my neck. And there's a picture up there of my neck, too, where he bit me. So I continue to be here by the grace of... Matthew, God, by the grace of God. Now, our ghost picture contest. It's over, but it's not over judging-wise. I want you all to go to artbell.com, and we've got some tragically bad ghost pictures, and we've got some real winners. I mean some really, really good ghost photographs. So you be the judge. The winner, gets a radio and a 1-year subscription to Sirius XM, so go up there and judge. You are the ones that are going to pick the winner. It's that simple, really. You're going to pick the winner, not me, not the Ghost Master, you. So you need to go up there and give kudos and points to the good ghost photographs. Okay? Kind of leaf through them. And those stories, by the way, and we'll announce the winner of the ghost photograph contest on Spooky Matter on Thursday. Coming right up. If you have a ghost story, there's still time to get it in. Send me a simple summary of your ghost story and include a phone number at the bottom, and perhaps we will call you. That's right, we may call you. All right, things to see on the website tonight. Oh, heavens, I have a video for you that I'm telling you, it was covered by a local Pueblo, Colorado TV station. This, ladies and gentlemen, I don't want to give it all away. Here's all I'll say. It's about a woman who got caught in a flood. They had a lot of floods there. And she's in her car as it sinks. But there is an ending to this story that will blow you away. I'm serious. Is that good? So you need to go up to the website and then leaf through, at the front there, you'll see the picture of the oil rig. Then you've got the little arrows and you can or just wait and it'll click through. When you get to the one of Pueblo, Colorado, oh my. You need to see that and see it to the very end. All right? Don't stop halfway through or stop once you see her rescued, because the punchline, which will send chills down your spine, I mean, this probably gets near the level of a miracle. All right? It's all at artbell.com. Also, I sent Keith, though I don't know that he's put it up yet, the Dome of the Rock UFO. You remember that? Somebody sent 4 sync cameras in of that UFO. And, of course, as I mentioned, the oil platform. Other reasons to go to artbell.com? Well, the wormhole, for one, where you can send me a message. Just find the wormhole and send me a message. It will go in Arizona, it's back out again here in Nevada, right in front of me. An Oklahoma school teacher says she's seen heaven's pearly gates and lived to tell the tale. Crystal McVeigh's near-death experience brought her face to face with a God that she spent a lifetime doubting. And the Altus, Oklahoma woman says, The only reason that she's even alive is so she can tell others now. About 10 to 20% of people who go into cardiac arrest or clinical death have lucid memories of their brush with death. She remembers. She claims she talked to God. She was treated for pancreatitis in 2009 when an unexpected reaction to pain medication caused her to stop breathing. That's it. On the way to room temperature, as Rush would say. But she had this amazing experience, and this is a really, really big topic that I want to talk to you about. I want to have a serious discussion about it, no pun intended. So we're going to be looking for people who have had, well, death and an experience that they would be willing to relate, and then life again. It is an intensely interesting subject for me, as you know, as I hear the footsteps. I'm 68 years old now, so I can hear footsteps in the distance. Very interesting topic. So if you've had something like that, email me, artbell@artbell.com. Looking very briefly at the news, we were all hoping that immigration reform would happen this year. Doesn't look so good now. They're just not going to agree on anything, and if anything's broken, I'll tell you, the immigration system is, I know, personal experience, is really broken. In fact, here's how broken it is. If you send paperwork to the Immigration and Naturalization Service, and if that paperwork is lost, even if you have a receipt showing that they received it, stamped it, doesn't matter. It's your fault. Not their fault. It's your fault. Even if you can prove they received it, signed for it, it's your fault. And that's only an example of what it's like. It needs overhaul. So let's hope they get to it. With website woes ongoing, the administration Monday granted a 6-week extension, that'll be until March 31st, for Americans to sign up for their shiny new healthcare coverage and pay whatever they're going to have to pay. Maybe the administration thought people out here were still using dial-up. The governors of Pacific coastal U.S. states, that'd be California, Oregon, Washington, I guess, and a Canadian province to boot, are all going to begin coordinating policies that place a price on greenhouse pollution, greenhouse gas pollution, and mandating the use of cleaner burning fuels or else. So all of that's going on. Don't forget, come Thursday, Spooky Matter begins. No guests. I never ever have guests on that show. Spooky Matter will be ghost stories only. And while I thought there is no way the people at that other program could step lower than the things that have already happened, now I've heard they're poaching our ghosts. That's right. A good dozen of our ghosts have reported that they've been poached. They'll be on the other program. Just kidding. I know you deceive me now. Well, okay, here we go. I love long-form talk radio, especially one with only a couple of breaks, every hour, mostly content. For over 15 years, Mr. Jason Martell has been one of the leading researchers and lecturers specializing in ancient advanced technologies. Mr. Martell's research has been featured worldwide on numerous TV networks: Discovery Channel, History Channel, Sci-Fi Channel, BBC, and others. Today, Mr. Martell is working on his next scientific recreation of ancient technology based on data obtained from the Sumerian cuneiform cylinder seals from 3000 BC. He is also planning several groundbreaking international research expeditions. Expeditions focus on gaining access to ancient Sumerian artifacts and other archaeological relics not currently accessible to the public. In other words, secret stuff. In addition to his research, Mr. Martell is founder of www.booyamedia.com. How's that for a name? B-O-O-Y-A. Booyamedia.com, a leading mobile technology company. Here is Mr. Jason Martell. Jason, welcome to Dark Matter.
Hey, Art. Thank you so much for having me on your show.
You're most welcome. I really am looking forward to this. I want to qualify the beginning of the show here, Jason, by saying I'm kind of a skeptic when it comes to this sort of thing.
Excellent.
However, I am ready for you to try and convince me, because I would love to believe it is so.
Well, I know you're a seasoned pro in these topics, so it's kind of an honor for me to just have these conversations directly with you and see how you respond.
Okay, good. So what we're talking about here is man or something before man. In other words, something so old that it rose up as a civilization of sorts and became extinct before we ever arrived on the planet, human beings. Is that
yeah.
fair? Yes?
That's pretty much right on the head, Art. Diving into that a little deeper, basically, when I first started to look into these topics, I was 21, I'm now 39, and I started to be very interested in realizing that most of the ancient cultures that we're aware of, the infamous ones, the Egyptians and Mayans and India and such, they're all referencing a lost culture. Now, we only talk about it as Atlantis or Lemuria, but science has actually been turning the tables in the last 15 years in that topics like Atlantis or these lost civilizations are really starting to come back into the scientific focus to find cultures that existed beyond what we know of today as Sumer, ancient Egypt, which we put that date at around 3800 BC is when the civilizations that we know of today kind of sprung up out of the Stone Age.
All right. Is there truly enough time in the evolution of the Earth itself, I'm talking about the Earth itself, for life to have actually started, evolved here on Earth, or was it life, do you think, sent here perhaps already whole and complete?
Well, let me give you a little bit of background on how I got interested in these topics, just for your audience and for you as well, and I answer that question. When I was in college, as I mentioned, someone had just kind of mentioned to me. Now, I had no interest in aliens or ancient history or anything. I was a waiter and I was a surfer and just a normal college student. But then someone just kind of mentioned to me that there was possibly pyramids and a face on Mars, and that NASA had taken these photos. And I was very skeptical and was like, why would NASA hide something like that? It turns out, Art, that I was going to school in San Diego, and Mayans Space Science Systems was 2 blocks away from me. So as I started to listen to your show and Richard Hoagland and other people, as a young layman college student, I became very interested in, are there actually artificial structures on Mars? So I contacted Dr. Mike Malin directly. Dr. Mike Malin is the principal scientist in charge for the last 30 years of the cameras that we place on all our orbiters.
That's right. I have spoken to him a number of times.
Yes. And so as a college student, I reached out to Dr. Malin and said, listen, is there any possibility that these structures on Mars are artificial? And he said, well, no, these are all natural, sand and wind-eroded objects, nothing intelligent to see here. That kind of made my eyebrows raise a little higher, right? So what I started to do is just really take my focus off of Mars, because this is on another planet, when I realized there's structures here all over the Earth that we can't explain, and that's kind of led me on the path of what we're going to talk about tonight.
All right. May I stop you enough to ask if you have reviewed the work of Richard C. Hoagland?
Of course I have. Bought the Monuments of Mars, I think 2 editions, had him sign one, went to his birthday party in Del Mar many years back. I think the first time I met him was at a book signing of yours, which was in Encinitas, California. Again, well over 10 years ago.
I remember.
All right.
All right. Well, I have been a skeptic with Richard as well, although the last time he was on the program here on Dark Matter, he did hit me, Jason, with something that I found, he called it number 9. I don't suppose you've seen number 9, have you?
No.
It's a artifact on Mars, Jason, and the damn thing has a pipe sticking out of it. I mean, you might call it a rock, even though there's other aspects of it that are just startling, but it has a perfectly round pipe sticking out of it. And there's no way, Jason, that this is a natural object. Simple as that. That one got me. So if you have an opportunity to view what's called number 9, it's probably still up on my website. Take a look at that and let me know what you think.
I'll definitely check it out. That's
okay.
He's always been infamous for finding artifacts and things that I guess we're really never going to know until we send a manned mission. But I definitely was very intrigued initially by the Cydonia complex, the geometry and the math being displayed there, which really made me focus on a lot of these ancient cultures and raised the question for me, where do we really come from?
Well, NASA always kind of poo-pooed the phase on Mars, right?
Yes, they did. And I even refer to in my lectures sometimes when I show a chronological time range from 76 until, I think, 2009 of various images. And one of them I, to this day, still call the cat box image.
Yeah. But here's the thing I was going to point out, Jason. Even though they poo-pooed it, I noticed they spent a disproportionate amount of time going back to Cydonia. So while they publicly poo-pooed it, they keep going back. Now, that's got to mean something.
Right. Well, I think you and I and many of your listeners are on the belief that there is a public space program, and that's publicly reported, There's also a non-public space program, which is a little more hard to track and put our hands around. But I've leaned less on the cover-up at NASA simply because I realized that there's a political backup in that some engineer's been working at NASA for 19 years, making some little arm that's going to be on the rover, and this little arm's going to stick into the dirt and look for some amino acids. Mm-hmm. But there's no rabbit catcher or Martian catcher or something that's going to actually identify life. We don't have any instruments actually deployed on any of our rovers that are going to, scientifically confirm life. We're only looking for signs of life. So we're not quite there yet. But if anyone does pay attention, it has been very educating for me, just as a civilian, to see that, what they release from the surface of Mars, there is what appear to be vegetation and questionable objects, as we were talking about. So it does, I think, raise a little bit of curiosity.
All right. Let me pose this to you. There are things there that really do raise your eyebrows. Now, is it possible that NASA is well aware that there are artifacts on Mars from somebody or something that was there earlier, and they're releasing these photographs, and when somebody finally goes, oh my God, that's absolutely not some natural formation, that's artificial, and when they finally do that, NASA can say, that's kind of what we've been suspecting too, and we've been right up front with you because we've released all the photographs. Up to you.
Right. Well, this kind of leads to what we're going to talk about with some of the geometry and megalithic monuments here on Earth. I think the answer to that, Art, is if we ever do send people back to the moon publicly or to Mars, what we need to do are look at some of these monuments and some of the alignments astronomically that take place. Because here on Earth, there are monuments built all over the world, on every continent, that are specifically aligned to star constellations. And these repeat, these alignments repeat. So it's very possible that some of these other structures and geometrical diagrams are probably on the moon and Mars as well, and will collaborate further with what we have here on Earth.
Okay. All right, let's come back to Earth then. The theory of panspermia, what is that?
Right. So, there's a scientific term called panspermia, which basically says that in order for evolution here on Earth to actually have taken place in the 4.7 billion years that, it's been on Earth, there's just not enough time frame. The analogy is, if a tornado went through a junkyard and assembled a 747, that's the likelihood that all the elements would be, swown together in this primordial soup hit by lightning. So panspermia is just a theory, and there's even a modified one that says direct panspermia, which means life arrives whole and complete here. Direct panspermia would simply be that someone sent life here, whole and complete, which I kind of like. But that is a scientific term, and it does at least step into the doorway of explaining evolution here on Earth at a life system level. But when we get to the human being topic, I think there's a much more interesting discussion around what isn't a Darwinian evolution from something ever simplistic coming more complex. We seem to be here on Earth in a repeating cycle, which I'm going to call the Great Year. And many ancient cultures seem to be aware of a cyclical nature of something that repeats here on Earth on a very large scale of time. And that's why I think a lot of these monuments and things that we have are basically part of a much larger calendar system that the ancients were using.
All right. Well, the way you pronounce it suggests to me, I didn't realize it was panspermia. So that would suggest the genesis, I suppose, right?
Yes.
Yes, okay. So what is your theory? Was life, in what way was life seeded on Earth? What's your best guess?
Well, my best guess, really is that we seem to be in some type of a large cycle that is creating life here on Earth to evolve to a certain state and then drop out of this evolutionary state and kind of forget everything. So, when we speak of life in general, that's kind of a broader topic that I'll bypass for tonight and go right to the human evolution, if you don't mind. And, this is a really interesting topic, Art, because this is what led me to my research is I wanted to figure out where do we come from? Who is the oldest culture that has led up to us? And that led me into the Sumerian culture and Planet X and the Anunnaki, which is a good topic for us to touch on. But, from a higher level still, I started to realize that there seems to be a larger cycle of time that all the ancients were aware of. And we know of it, we just don't understand it. We hear things called the Golden Age or the Dark Ages, or why there's the division of the heavens into 12 parts into these zodiacal symbols. Well, it seems that the ancients were aware of some knowledge and used a system of time based on astronomical movements, which is just now starting to come into our comprehension in modern times.
All right. You're suggesting, I believe, that Darwinian evolution is flawed because you say they will never find the missing link. How do you know that?
Right. Well, Darwinian evolution is, I think, this view that everything simple is going to become ever more complex. So if we go further and further back into our history, we should pretty much just find more simple cultures and tribes. And then into the future, we're just going to become super advanced. What I'm seeing is actually that's not the case. It seems that there's a cycle here on Earth that is repeating, and it's a large cycle that lasts around 24,000 years. Now, a lot of the ancient cultures made reference to the fact that there is this cycle. The Mayans got a lot of publicity recently because they talked about a calendar system that was so accurate, and their calendar came to an ending point in 2012. Well, it wasn't actually an ending point. It was just an ending point in one of their calendars. So it's just very interesting, Art, that we can talk about some of the specifics tonight in that many different ancient cultures were aware of this large cycle of time and built monuments that align to specific star constellations that are kind of like markers in space as to where we are in this large cycle of time.
Okay, I still missed it somehow. You're saying that we will never find the missing link.
Yeah, I kind of breezed over that one. Sorry.
I really want the answer to that. Why will we never find the missing link?
I don't think that we'll not ever find the missing link. I just don't think that right now we're ready to accept what it is. And in my opinion, it has to be some type of genetic intervention, whether that be from an alien civilization or some lost culture that we're not on the record of understanding now. But it appears that if we look at the anthropological bone record of Australopithecine and Neanderthal and, comparing this bone to that bone, when we get to us and compare us to the closest relation of a Neanderthal, there's a huge gap between them and us. So somehow, magically, there was some type of a genetic intervention that took the hominoid that was maybe evolving here naturally, and kind of made them into us. And I say that just from a very high level of, if you look at a basic human and you put them naked in the jungle and had them run around, their skin would get, cut by branches, they'd get sunburned. And if you look at an ape and how strong they are compared to us and all the body hair that protects them, we are just extremely different at many levels when we look at this Darwinian evolution of bones and such.
All right, that's fascinating. I do have a question now. Is it possible, Jason, that if there was, and by the way, I believe it could be true, there was some genetic modification achieved by a power that we don't understand.
Mm-hmm.
If that occurred, and I'm not a scientist, is it possible that a geneticist could uncover evidence that occurred?
I think so. And as we, further decode the human genome, I know that there's already lots of what they call junk DNA and things that are in our DNA that they're just kind of scratching their head going, well, I guess it does something, but we don't really know.
Right.
Good friend of mine, Lloyd Pye, who I'm sure you're also familiar with.
I know Lloyd well.
Yeah, and I hope he's doing better. He's had some bouts with health recently, but he's a trooper. And he really did a lot of work around the genetics and wrote a book called Everything You Know Is Wrong, where he kind of gets deep into the genetic side of looking at the various elements of our gene code and breaking down where these anomalies exist and why they should be called out.
I'm not sure that finding it would be a problem. If a geneticist did find it, one could still say, look, that's where God's hand touched the human, or created the human, if you will. Or one could suggest that a race far, far ahead of ours stepped in and did the deed.
Yes, well, I guess only time will tell as we, our sciences advance more so that we can use, various quantum computing here in the future, I guess, and do things where we can get a much more whole and complete view of our genetic code. And if we ever do get to interact with other, publicly, if we ever get to interact with other life forms of intelligence, then there might be very interesting DNA samples from them that we can compare. But right now, it's all kind of a door shut. There aren't any aliens. No one's willing to cross that line scientifically. So that's why I spent my time, the last decade or so, really looking at the ancient evidence. All the modern things with aliens and even our genetics and science and stuff, it's very interesting. But what we do have is just a wealth of information from all these ancient cultures and the things that they went to great lengths to communicate to us, which we now think of mainly as mythology, really deserve another eye in looking at that evidence and saying, well, all these things that have happened in the past that we think are mythology, as our sciences kind of start to merge more with what's possible in the science fiction realm, I think we can see that some of the stuff in the past starts to raise people's eyebrows a little bit more and pay attention when we look at various structures and understand that the architecture and building skills that went into some of these monuments is very intriguing.
Okay. All right. Did you see the series After Man, I think it was called, where they showed 100 years after man was gone from the planet, 1,000, million?
I don't think so.
Too bad, because it showed what would happen to, for example, American architecture, our buildings, everything that is man would virtually disappear given enough years. And that sort of fits into what we're going to be talking about.
Yeah, and that makes sense. And, we get left with just a random piece of an artifact or tablets or texts, or tales. And so art for me, some of these ancient cultures, it's really interesting to see how they've played out scenarios in even more recent times that people can relate to that allows us to look further back in the past. And let me give you an example. I know you've heard of the term cargo cult. So
I have.
Yeah, and so for your audience, in like World War I, World War II, when we first started flying U.S. troops over Australia and Africa, and we landed in certain rural areas where, a tribesman had never seen a white man or they'd never seen a biplane in technology. Soldier gets out, lights up a cigarette, and holds out a voice recorder and records the Aboriginal's voice and plays it back to him. The Aboriginals are freaking out. They're like, wow, it's like a god, and the ship that he came in, what is this? So even as recently as World War I and World War II, we see it playing out that when the soldiers left, and I should also mention, every now and then, the soldier camps would get drop shipments, like a cargo plane flies over and just drops a bag of goods. Sometimes that bag of goods would land in the middle of a tribe instead of the camp, and they'd crack it open and find all these things falling from the sky, and they'd be like, oh, So when the soldiers left,
like a Coke bottle, for example.
Exactly, yeah, like that funny movie.
Let me tell you just a very brief story. I went up into communist China with Bob Crane and his wife, and this was years and years ago, just after it kind of opened. And we went into some small villages, and Bob Crane's wife is a blonde. And I'm telling you, Jason, people came out of their homes in these little towns and just stood and stared in almost disbelief. They hadn't seen Westerners, and a Westerner with blonde hair, that's big time. So it's kind of like that in a way. I mean, they were so isolated that they were just amazed to see it. See Westerners, see blonde hair. Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you.
Go ahead.
Just wanted to squeeze out that analogy before I get it. What was simply that the cargo cult is that, when the soldiers left, the Aboriginals started to scrape out runways, made straw models of aircraft, and started to kind of worship these as items, hoping to entice the soldiers to come back. And so,
are you referring now to the runways down in Peru, that kind of thing?
Well, not really. I mean, that's a different set of circumstances, but just in general, the idea of a cargo cult, even in recent times, we see how greatly it affects these Aboriginals. So when we look back into the past, places like Bolivia and Peru and South America, we see these very clear attempts to communicate to whatever must have been in the sky at that time. And the paradox there is that none of the civilizations that were human at that time had hot air balloons or gliders or any type of flight, yet they were clearly communicating to people in the sky.
Okay. Clearly. I mean, you sound pretty sure about that.
Well, when we look in, for instance, Peru, where the Nazca lines are, since we bring that up, we have that wonderful figure of El Astronato carved into a mountainside, and he's kind of, they're waving hi to anybody that would see him. And any of those structures in Peru, like the runways or what really intrigued me are actually in the foothills, some of the mountains right in that range in Bolivia, we find very large geometric patterns. And you can't see any of these. You can't see El Astronato or any of the Nazca figurines, as most people know, unless you're in the sky in some type of conveyance that allows you to be above the surface of the ground.
Yes.
So, for me, Art, I thought it was really interesting that, there are various descriptions in even more recent times of how ancient people handle this, but it starts to get really interesting, and this kind of ties into what you just said with your Bob Crane's wife. What's also very interesting in studying a lot of these South American cultures, these are all mostly dark-haired people, dark-skinned, but their gods are usually tall, pale, blonde people. Kukulkan and Quetzalcoatl and various other South American gods are either depicted with long red hair or white hair, and they usually are pale in skin. Now, this is a very interesting paradox when all the...
It is because we generally, we as humans, model our gods after, I think you're going to suggest, what they thought were gods.
Exactly.
How long ago are we talking about right now? If we went back to the time when these gods were being created, or the image of these gods, how long ago was that?
We're roughly talking around 2500 BC, or pretty much 4,000 years ago.
Okay.
And what we see across the board, Art, is, various cultures from Egyptian to Mesopotamian, Mayan, they all have what are what appears to be, very articulate and well-positioned monuments that create these alignments. And some of these monuments are actually dedicated towards reuniting or some ceremony around their god. In Chichen Itza in South America, on a specific day, when the sun hits the side of the pyramid, it makes this light and shadow effect of a serpent coming down the steps. And, to build a pyramid at a specific angle so that an astronomical shadow will create an effect that repeats every year, that's pretty good. And
It is indeed pretty good. Hold tight a moment, Jason. It is indeed pretty good. And then I wonder how all of this mixes into what happened 2,000 years ago, plus a little now. And then the whole Adam and Eve thing. But this is fascinating stuff. From the high desert in the great American Southwest, this is Dark Matter, raging in the night. Jason Martell is my guest, and a very, very interesting guest he is. We're talking about what may have come before us, way before us. There are signs, there may be leaks, there may be artifacts, there may be a lot of things that will connect to the fact that we are not first. Jason, welcome back.
thank you, Art.
All right. How frequently, with the kind of thing that you're talking about, you run smack into the Bible?
Well, I was raised as a Christian.
Mm-hmm.
So, that really was one of the first things that I think at a very young age, I, would be in church and I'd look up someone next to me and they're raising their hands and really feeling it. And I didn't understand why I couldn't get in touch with a higher power. So for me, I started from that angle, but really I have such a great respect for all the world religions because, I now see kind of a unification in all the ancient views kind of being very similar, that something happened in our past very clearly where there was a time when there were giants upon the earth, whether that means great in stature or actually physical giants. But there seems to have been a time when most ancient cultures interacted with their living gods, where we've lost that connection.
Well, we're talking about that missing link in that moment when whatever was here was touched magically in some way, or technologically in some way, and so began the human. Well, if that touch were to be said to be God, I don't think there'd be a problem. If that touch were said to be alien, I think there'd be a big problem. Have you thought that over?
I have, and it might be a good time for us to talk about the oldest civilization that we have record on Earth, the Sumerian Civilization, because that's really where one of the jumping points for me, as far as curiosity, again, coming from a Christian background, in studying the Sumerian culture, which is today's southern Iraq, we called Mesopotamia, Babylon, originally Sumer. And what we have out of Sumer are a collection of cuneiform scripts, which is a written language, as well as pictograms in the form of cylinder seals and various tablets. And for me, Art, it became very clear when the archaeological evidence started to support stories in the Bible, but as fact. So some of the things like the flood tablet, we have in the British Museum on display, there's a tablet called the flood tablet, and it's written in an ancient Akkadian text. They've actually found a few other various versions, but essentially what we have here is a story of the Great Flood, recorded in stone, predating the Hebrew or the King James version of this tale, and it's thousands of years before these known texts that we have today.
I guess it would be too much or difficult for you to actually lay out what is in that tablet and the way they described it, because I'd be very curious. Are you able to do that?
I can, to a certain degree. Essentially what we have is, in the Bible, we have a very truncated version of a story that lasts 7 days and God creating the heavens and the earth. But in the Sumerian version, there are actually 7 tablets of creation. And these tablets very specifically explain how we come into being. And it's a process, basically, that is explained.
Wait, I'm sorry. I thought it was the flood. We were going to talk about the flood tablet.
I'm sorry. Yeah, got carried away there.
Okay.
Just jumped right into another topic.
Right.
The flood tablet on display in the British Museum is, again, one of those that is part of a much larger set of texts. It's called, actually, the Enuma Elish. There was about 11 tablets. So this one specific tablet in that story explains the flood. And what's interesting about the Sumerian version is it very specifically says why there was a great flood. It cites that there is a much larger body. And now, let me put a little preface on this, too. There's only been a handful of scholars that actually read Sumerian cuneiform script, this ancient language. And most of the translations that I'm going to reference in our discussion tonight are translated through Zechariah Sitchin. Now, mainstream science will look at Zechariah Sitchin's descriptions and will argue over a certain word or a phrase and the meaning of that word or that specific phrase. However, no one in the archaeological community is able to compile a well-rounded, woven story interlinking all of the information from these tablets.
Gotcha. All right, Jason, what I'm searching for here is, does it describe things like when the flood came, how much of the earth the flood covered, how long it lasted? In other words, does it lay it out?
No, it doesn't. And if it does, I unfortunately am not that close to it to be able to answer it that way. But what I can do is, again, just validate the fact that this tale isn't just a biblical tale. We have an actual artifact predating the paper version of our Bible, essentially telling the same thing. Why that's important, Art, is their other tablets, their other pieces of information touch on other highly significant biblical events like Adam and Eve or the creation of our actual earth. And so putting all of that into a pot and stirring it together, we have very interesting information that come out of some of the most ancient cultures that we have, where we are now almost starting to scientifically confirm a lot of these biblical pieces that we thought were just allegory myth.
For example, Adam and Eve? You're saying it confirms Adam and Eve?
Well, confirm is, again, it's a hypothesis and there's evidence there to support it.
I'm using your word.
Yeah. When we look at the evidence and things that we've pulled out of the Sumerian descriptions of their tales, we have very clear descriptions of them creating us in their image and after their likeness, just like the Bible says. But in some of these Sumerian texts, it's a lot more elongated. There is a text specifically talking about how the atom was created. And it wasn't Adam as in that's your name. Adamu, the atom, correct. The word Adamu is a plural in Hebrew for worker. So the Sumerian texts actually explain that one of these gods that came here, they called them Anunnaki, and that's a term used throughout the Sumerian text to refer to their gods, Anunnaki. That just simply means those who from heaven come to earth. One of their texts explains how a very specific Anunnaki, she was a chief medical officer. Her name was Nin Harsad, and she actually created the first working atom. There were 2 or 3 versions that didn't function, where the arm in one didn't work, another, the kidney didn't function, and they actually have cylinder-sealed descriptions, little pictograms, little scenes that go along with these texts, and you see her holding up a small being, and she's saying, I've done it. In the background, what appear to be tubes and vases on a shelf. Could this be a primitive representation of an in vitro fertilization? I don't know.
Was there a pictorial of her?
Yes. There's a pictorial.
What did she look like?
Well, we look like them. They look like us. I mean, essentially...
Okay, these were done in... Obviously, I'm not looking at them. I mean, basically in stick form, or it had to be a little better than that because you're describing it as a her.
Right. So what they did was the the person who could create these drawings was called a scribe, and he used something called a stylus, which looks like an oversized screwdriver, and they would twist it and turn it to make the text in wet clay. And accompanying that, so we still don't know how they did this, but they would take a piece of wet clay and carve in reverse these intricate little figurines and pictures. So they're not just stick figures. There are, detailed figures and art, but they would carve it in reverse. Sorry, Art. They would carve it in reverse. And then when you pressed it into another piece of wet clay, it would leave the positive imprint. So it was very fascinating that they were able to even do that at such a scale.
How were you able to, or how was anybody able to discern it was a female?
Well, the text explain that she is a female, and when you look at her in the picture, she's actually got a ponytail, and her face features are more feminine.
Okay. All right. And she created the atom, which turned out to be small, but are we talking about a baby?
Right. So it's the first working model, and I'm sure it was, a child. And, it's, again, when we look at this as just a mythological tale, it's pretty darn accurate considering how we look at, again, test tube fertilization or in vitro fertilization.
Oh, I'm with you. That happened now. Now, how did the Eve get created?
Well, that part gets a little bit more convoluted into the genetic side, which I'd probably not do any good to speak at it from my angle, other than the understanding.
I mean, there was this whole rib thing,
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say, is other than the understanding of the biblical term. But I think just from a core concept, we have many of these stories that come out of ancient Sumer, where it's a really interesting piece of the puzzle. And some of it, again, when we try and piece it together with science, their creation myth goes into a very detailed explanation as to how our Earth was even created, and pretty much fits with our current cosmology. If we understand that the Earth now is kind of, the continents are all moved into a certain position, but at some point they were one large landmass called Pangea.
Right.
And
and that does make sense, because if you try it, the Earth, the continents, they fit together.
Exactly. And the Sumerians give a very interesting tale of explaining that our primitive Earth, billions of years ago, they say before it had finished becoming a solid mass, it had this interaction with what they called Nibiru. It was a kind of like a rogue star that somehow got attracted to our solar system, and there was this collision between our primitive Earth and one of the moons of this star, or this planet that came into our solar system, and this huge...
all right. What you're referring to is Planet X, right?
I am.
Okay. And you're saying that it was not Planet X that collided with or even disturbed us by being close, but it was one of the moons of Planet X that collided with Earth.
That's correct, yes. And so the Sumerians don't use the term Planet X, they use the term Nibiru, and we again see similarities in this cosmological story from the Sumerians, where when this collision took place, we had half of our Earth get strewn out into what we now call the asteroid belt. The Bible calls it the hammered out bracelet. And then the Earth that we know of goes into its current position in its new orbit. Now, after a large calamity like that, where half the planet is strewed out into the asteroid belt, if you think about it, that leaves us with just half a planet, literally a Pangea. But over time, we've now moved into the positions like the skin of an apple. The continents have moved to where they are. So there's little pieces like that, Art, where the Sumerian version of many of the stories of our creation or of our cosmology, our science is kind of catching up and going, the Sumerians actually knew information that our sciences are just now starting to confirm.
So what you're suggesting, there's two ways to look at this. One is the biblical, and the other is something even older that you've been talking about, and you're suggesting that they do coincide, but at some point you're going to have to sort of make a intellectual mental choice about, well, the Bible. this was one way to explain it, but over here we have this other thing that happened, and it's the real thing that happened.
Right, and so that's why there's this wonderful context from all the other cultures around the world, not just our one Judeo-Christian view or the Mesopotamian view that's now extracted into our Christian view. There are all these other collaborating cultures that have a similar line of evidence in that the knowledge that they had, it seems to be so complex that when we look at most of these ancient cultures like the Egyptians, Mayans, and Sumer, they were right out of the Stone Age, right at the time when it seems to have been that they were, just starting. They're at the most advanced part of their civilization. And then they kind of gradually went downhill. So it's a hard thing for us to try and figure out, like, why are these gaps in knowledge? It seems like many of the ancient cultures knew a bunch of information and ways to build monuments that we can't today. And then we kind of forgot it all when we went into the Dark Ages.
Jason, you do realize that not all that long ago, they would have strapped you to a couple of hunks of wood with kindling underneath, and they would have burned you alive as a warlock.
You're right, and that's part of us coming out of the Dark Ages, where we've been in this, we went into this realm where we kind of lose all of this information. But as we go further back, we look at these monuments in various sites, and we see alignments and things that point to a much earlier date than Sumer or Egypt, and we don't know where they come from. And I can give you some examples, and this one, of course...
Ballpark, when you say much older, give me an idea of how much older.
10,500 BC and older, maybe between 10,500 BC to, let's say, 50,000 BC. So much further into our past. We've just now started to uncover sites, thankfully, due to the work of a show on the History Channel that's now in its 6th season. I'm grateful to be a part of it, Ancient Aliens. They have been finding and researching sites that really were not even on the radar. Sites like Göbekli Tepe in Turkey.
All right, Jason, what is the best evidence that you would cite from these programs, from that research, of something that old?
I get that question a lot. I love it. And, I think for me the answer is vitrification. Some people might have to Google that. It is a good term, but vitrification means the heating of a stone until it becomes a molten state. And so what we see, Art, is, at Machu Picchu and Teotihuacan and Pumapunku and all these sites where the stones are perfectly fit together or carved out with these intricate patterns like putty. There's no way to explain how they did that other than they were heating the stone, some of these diorite, granite. They would heat this stone somehow to a molten state. Then you can slice it in half, stick it together, drill holes through it, no problem. And then it hardens back into a stone. But we have no answer to explain what tools or how they were able to make granite into a molten state.
Well, it's interesting you would mention that, because there are those who suggest the tolerances in the pyramids in Egypt are absolutely impossible. They could not have achieved that then unless they were actually melting stone and pouring it, which explains how they could have done it, because those rocks are way too big and too heavy for anybody to have moved back then.
That's a good point. They're almost like large cement blocks that came out of a mill or something. And now Egypt is a really great example because you're familiar with this topic too. Now, the alignments that we see at Giza are part of this marker system. There's a crypt in Dendera, Egypt, where on one of the walls it looks like some of the Egyptians are holding up large light bulbs. I recently recreated a version of this bulb and actually made it function for the History Channel. But in that same area of Dendera, there is also a very large relief of an astronomical zodiac. And what a lot of people don't understand is that, again, these monuments are built as some type of large marker. Giza is an excellent example. Through the work of Robert Guval, we learned about a decade ago that the 3 pyramids of Giza are a terrestrial map of Orion, right?
That's right.
We can use star charting and constellation software, Redshift, and various other programs so that you can say, where are the stars going to be above me tonight? Or Where were the stars above me at 10,500 BC?
That's
Well,
right.
it turns out in 10,500 BC, Giza is perfectly aligned to Orion, the three stars of Orion, and the Sphinx is looking directly into the constellation of Leo. So, I don't know how.
Can I for a second take you back to the light bulbs?
Yeah. Okay. Sure.
You believe that what's inscribed in stone, is that correct?
Yes. Yes.
Is a creature of that time holding up what you represent as a light bulb.
Well, creature. I mean, it's a human, but yes.
Well, I'm not sure what point of creation or evolution we're talking about, but okay. A human holding up a light bulb, and that would have been 10,000 plus years ago?
I'm sorry. Well, no, forgive me. So the artifacts in Egypt, just when we go to one of the crypts in Dendera, these are wall reliefs that were done by the Egyptians, probably in, let's say, 3000 BC.
That's fine. That's
yeah,
fine.
But what it shows is two things I mentioned. The first one is why I was interested in Dendera in the first place. There are wall reliefs that show Egyptians holding what appear to be large light bulbs plugged into a device. Egyptologists say that that's a lotus flower, and the bulb, what looks like a bulb, is actually just the aroma coming out of the flower. I mean, it's not a very good explanation from the scientific community, but
So
it
what
does
did
appear
you
to be a
do?
light bulb.
You said you created a light bulb as a demonstration, yes?
I did.
Did
So-
you make a light bulb? I mean,
Well, here's what I did. So I hired a person who is an expert in creating lighting, various like custom bulbs, and I had him create a filament-based bulb that's a plasma bulb. So just like we've heard of swamp gas, it's possible that gases coming out of just natural occurrence are ignited by a small heat source and they create phosphorescence.
right.
So it's very possible that the Egyptians could access a swamp or some methane gas and give it a small source of energy, which is another thing we'll talk about, and create phosphorescence. So all I did was create a very light plasma bulb with 4 volts introduced to it, creates a light, a phosphorescence glow.
Fascinating.
And with that, we will leave Art Bell and Jason Martell for tonight. We will resume with them tomorrow night on part 2. With that, we will bring today's day of From Day One to a close. As always, if you would be so kind, please like, share, and subscribe. Get us to that goal of 50,000 views. So Boxy sends us those nice red boxes we can send to all of you. And YouTube puts us on the algorithms. So until next time, again, like, share, and subscribe. Be kind to one another and release the Krakens. As we march on, as this battle is lost here on From Day One. Have a great night, everybody. We'll show that final battle just to show that we are indeed lost, and then the show will come to an end. While that, Judge Judy will very quickly tell it like she sees it.
I'm sorry, but this is wrong.
Miss Perdue, let me tell you what my problem with you is. My problem is with you is you're a lousy daughter. Because
Your Honor, no, I'm sorry.
Because I took
Your Honor, no. This woman abandoned me when I was 3 years old. She didn't come back in my life until I was 48 years old. She come back telling me she was doing all of this. She wanted to be with my kids and her great grandkids. And you turn around and do
Miss
this.
Perdue, I gave you an option to clean up this whole case and to make your mother, who has clearly made you financially more comfortable. Your mother's not going to live forever, shorter rather than longer. She wants the security of knowing she's not going to be thrown out of a trailer that you own.
Mm-hmm.
And I said to you, are you prepared to sign an agreement giving her a life estate in that trailer so she knows that she has the right to have a home? And you answered no.
And with that, have a great night, everybody. Enjoy your night's rest. And we'll see you here tomorrow as the new Champions season begins for the rest of you. For me, I'll have one more day of this current nature season before I get to join you. Till then again, have a great night and thanks for watching From Day One.